Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Great to have you with us. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been indicted on 3 counts: bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Achavai Mendelblit, who is the Attorney General, was seen as a political ally of Netanyahu's, brought the charges against the Prime Minister. Now, Israel is sharply divided over these indictments, 50-50, some polls say. The Prime Minister and his allies blaming it on the left and the media, others worried about a deeper shift to the right as a result of a possible post-Netanyahu era, and others saying these indictments will amount to absolutely nothing. And this is what Prime Minister Netanyahu had to say about those indictments.
ולכן במשך 3 שנים הם מבצעים נגדנו רדיפה פוליטית.
The left knows that with our achievements, they have no chance of defeating us in the voting booths. And for this reason, for the last 3 years, they have orchestrated a political persecution campaign, an unprecedented hunt, with one goal: to topple the right-wing government under my leadership, and to raise the power of the left party of Lapid and Gantz. They have applied unending brutish pressure, I would say almost inhuman, against the state attorney in order to make him say that he is considering to indict me with a criminal charge pending a hearing, even when it is clear that there is nothing there.
We're joined by a Real News correspondent and producer, Shir Hever, author of Privatization of Israeli Security. Shir, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
So let's talk about this here for a moment. So what are we missing here in this? I mean, the press, we clearly see this indictment is taking place. There are a lot of questions I think I have and the viewers have about what we're missing.
I think what we're missing is everything that he wasn't indicted for. And that's really the bigger story. Because you mentioned in the intro that Avishai Mendelblit was Netanyahu's former political ally. No. He's still his close ally and friend.
Then why did he indict him? Then why did he participate?
He had no choice. In fact, the state attorney office, everyone in that office were very much taken by surprise by this indictment because they expected something else entirely. First of all, this indictment should have taken place years ago. It took 3 years for Mendelblit just to issue the indictment after the evidence was very clear and made public many years ago. Some of the crimes that are mentioned in this indictment started in 2006. So now that he's just making that indictment now is really as late as he could possibly postpone it. Second of all, the list of crimes is a much shorter list than what was expected. If we look at one of these cases, the case that is known as 2000, where Netanyahu has met with the head of one of Israel's biggest media empires and agreed with him to help him sell more newspapers in exchange for getting better coverage in those newspapers. Then the Mendelblit decided to indict the head of the media empire in the charge of bribery. So he says bribery has allegedly taken place, but Netanyahu is only charged with malfeasance. So he has accepted the bribe, but it doesn't count as bribery, but rather as a smaller charge.
So let me ask you a question about that particular indictment, because I was very curious about this when I read through it. So the newspaper they're taking on in this apparent indictment, the other newspaper, is owned by Sheldon Adelson, who is a huge ally of Netanyahu. So what was that game about?
Well, Netanyahu is claiming to his defense that he was trying to trick and entrap Noni Moses, the owner of Yediot Achronot, the other newspaper. Noni Moses is claiming the exact same thing. He's saying, I was trying to entrap Netanyahu. This is a very flimsy defense on both sides. And there's a recording of the conversation. If you listen to that recording, it's unbelievable, where Noni Moses is telling Netanyahu, you can legislate to stop Adelson's newspaper in order to put me again on the #1 place. And Netanyahu tells him, well, I have to talk to the gingerhead first. And he refers to Adelson by that. But you can already start turning the ship around, meaning you can already start changing the coverage. But I really have to say something very important. When I say what is not included in this indictment, the most important issue, in my personal opinion, is that the crimes of theft, bribery, malfeasance, fraud, these are minor crimes compared to the crime of killing, to war crimes, to confiscating private land from people, from using live ammunition against protesters, from bombarding civilian neighborhoods. This is the real crime for which Netanyahu is responsible and for which he needs to face a trial. But of course, the Israeli legal system is absolutely not going to put him on trial for these things.
Right. So for clarity's sake, what you're saying now are these political issues that are really critical, but as you said, they were never part of any consideration of indictments when it came to Netanyahu.
Absolutely. The
Right.
Israeli legal system does not consider killing Palestinian civilians to be a crime. This is something that unfortunately has to be said. It boggles the mind, but this is the reality.
So
But
I'm
there's
sorry,
another
go ahead.
issue that was actually mentioned many times, exposed by the Israeli media, which is the divertment of money of about $4 billion from the Israeli defense budget to buying unnecessary submarines from a German company because there was bribery involved. And this bribery involved Netanyahu's lawyer, Netanyahu's cousin, Netanyahu's close friend. Nevertheless, Avichai Mendelblit said from day one, I'm not even going to interrogate Netanyahu on this. I'm not going to investigate whether he's involved or not. And that decision to just exclude Netanyahu from that massive corruption scandal, maybe the biggest in the history of Israel, actually shows that Mendelblit really chose to choose the easiest and smallest and most minor charges. And I think that shows that he remains a good friend of Netanyahu. Two more things I need to mention in this context. First of all, Netanyahu's wife, Sarah Netanyahu, has been completely left off of all these indictments, even though she has been involved in some of these alleged crimes and received gifts which would count as bribery and so on. And second is the fact that Mandelblit wrote this indictment in the second person. And I've never seen a legal document like that in the Israeli legal system. And I find it bordering on bizarre. Instead of writing, the suspect has allegedly committed this and that crime, he's saying, you have allegedly committed this and that crime. He's having a private conversation with Netanyahu. In the last 2 years, Mendelblit and Netanyahu met 104 times without witnesses and without a recording. So the man who is supposed to investigate and charge Netanyahu of crimes is his close friend. They're meeting behind closed doors and planning exactly what is going to happen next to make sure that Netanyahu has a way out.
So let me ask you a series of very quick questions here in the time that we have left. So if what you, the way you describe the situation between the Attorney General and the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, what does that mean for the case against him? Will there be an active case against him? Will Netanyahu have to go to court? Is there a chance he can be convicted? Would he be forced to resign because of this? Or is this part of the game to make it appear as if something's going to happen and nothing will happen?
I think Mendelblit did everything he can to give Netanyahu a way out, but he cannot. There's only so much that he can do. And I think that's, Netanyahu is a brilliant manipulator. He understands public sentiment better than most leaders around the world. And I think many people are learning from him, like Trump and Bolsonaro, and a lot of leaders around the world who are themselves investigated for possible corruption charges are learning from Netanyahu how to behave. But what Mendelblit actually said is that all of these charges are pending a hearing. And the hearing will only happen after the elections. So Netanyahu is hoping to win the elections by a landslide. And he probably will. He has very good chances to win the elections by a landslide and then say, well, the people have already exonerated. In the eyes of the people, I'm innocent. And then maybe cut a deal to get the charges dropped against him. But even though that was the way that it was phrased in the indictment, the Israeli media and the Israeli law enforcement agencies, they see it quite differently. They realize that this is not something that can just be brushed aside and ignored. So it is possible they're going to let him, they'll drop all the charges in exchange for Netanyahu stepping down from office. That is one of the possibilities that many pundits and speculators are promoting. But just letting him ignore the whole thing and continue as the prime minister, well, that may work in places like Turkey or Hungary, but it doesn't work in Israel because Israel is a colonialist society. And the public have been socialized and educated to believe that they are masters of their own destiny and of their own land and society. They will not accept this kind of meekness of being the foot soldiers of Netanyahu and to accept the fact that he can steal their money and get away with it.
So two other very quick questions here, because we're running out of time with this, but I want to, one of the poll that came out at the Israeli Times the other day showed that the center-left party of Gantz, the former general, with 44 seats to 25 for Likud, which is Netanyahu's party, does that mean momentum has picked up for the center-left, or however you describe them, in this election because of this indictment? And Netanyahu is in danger of losing? Because you just said the opposite.
Yeah, well, I've seen about 20 polls in the last couple of weeks. And all of these polls painted a completely different picture in which Netanyahu is winning by a very large majority. And it's not just a question of these two party sizes, but also what are the other parties which can form a coalition. And I also think that this so-called opposition party by Gantz and Lapid is in fact already preparing to sit in the coalition with Netanyahu as junior partners.
But I thought Gantz said he would not sit with Netanyahu if he won because of the indictments.
Well, unlike other Israeli politicians, they have avoided the question, will you refuse to sit with him? And maybe said something like, well, he should resign, he should step down. But if it comes out that he wins the election, will you sit down with him in the same cabinet? When that question was posed to them by journalists, they said, well, let's change the subject. So I think that shows that they understand the intricacies of this issue a bit differently. And in fact, this one poll, which was published by Israel Today, is the outlier. And I find it very surprising, actually, because everyone in Israel knows that Netanyahu was going to be indicted. That was not a surprise. If anything, the surprise was how weak the indictment was. So I don't think it's because the indictment suddenly 10 seats in the polls have moved to another party. Absolutely not. I think what is happening is that Netanyahu is manipulating public opinion in order to present himself as the underdog, being persecuted by the so-called left, even though there is no left. There is a very, very small left movement in Israel, in order to get a populist support and win the election with a big majority.
So finally, one of the things that comes out of these indictments is that there's, in this campaign for the next Israeli election, is that Netanyahu is moving even further right in terms of the coalition he's building, with a very far-right racist party like Kahani's party, which we can talk about just briefly to describe that for the viewers, and that some people have written in 972 and other places that this election could prove and even make it even worse for Palestinians than any election before, especially in a post-Netanyahu era. So how would you comment on those things as we close?
Yeah, very briefly, I'll say Netanyahu's rhetoric and language is very right-wing, very racist, absolutely. And also this party that he's supporting from the outside, which is a party in the very, very far right. However, we have to distinguish between actions and talk. And the so-called left opposition to Netanyahu, this Gantz and Lapid party, they're saying, don't judge us by our statements about Palestinians. Judge us by how many Palestinians we kill. And I think that's where the difference is. Netanyahu is big on talk, and he likes to delegitimize people, Palestinians, to call everyone who doesn't agree with him a lefty, as if it was a curse word. But when it comes to actions, he is not as bad as the people who are supposedly to his left.
Well, Shir Hever, it's always great to talk with you. I appreciate you taking the time. And the Shir Hever, correspondent for the Real News Network, and I'm Mark Steiner for the Real News. Thank you all for joining us. Take care.